Calico fans, this is H.H. Sherman from Sigma Comics, and I'm coming to you from the greatest city in the world. It's New York City, you know that. Thank you for joining us tonight for another video. Before I continue, I'm going to ask you to hit the like button or the subscribe button because I think you guys are really going to love what you're about to hear. It's comic book shop talk, all right? Just like if we were at a comic book shop, we're going to talk about some comics, history, and story right now. But before we do, I'm going to take a swig of the Calico mug. Good stuff. Jim Shooter. You know, I've always been a big fan of Jim Shooter. And as a kid, Jim Shooter was really doing his thing in comics when I was a kid, a child, all right? And I'm talking about a kid, from 6, I guess, all the way to 17, which is really when I was reading comics. I read comics for about 11 years, from 6 to 17. And Jim Shooter's name was on those comics, at pretty much every single comic that I read, all right? And because I was mostly a Marvel kid growing up, my favorite character was Spider-Man growing up. And so I pretty much had all the Spider-Man comic books. But I also read DC comics like, Batman. I mean, Batman was pretty much the only thing I read. And I was a little bit later when I was, when I turned 15 is when I started reading Batman. And I kept reading him till I was, 17. Let's call it 18 tops. But Jim Shooter's name was always on those Marvel comics that I read. And he was the editor-in-chief. He was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time, all throughout the 80s, and I think early 90s. And, what a remarkable job he was doing there. Or maybe not early 90s, but I may be mistaken on that. But certainly in the 80s, it was Jim Shooter. When it was Marvel Comics that I was reading, I would always see his name, editor-in-chief there. Wonderful job that he did. All those comics. I mean, frankly, I don't even think I remember a bad Marvel comic. Every single comic book that I read in the 80s, it was damn good. I don't think I ever walked away from a comic book that, man, this is horrible. And, there's so many components to that. I realize that, to a child, everything is good and it's new and big and different. I get it. Absolutely, there's validity to that. But there's also even more validity to taking a job very, very seriously. And folks, let me tell you, if there's anyone who ever took their job seriously at Marvel Comics, that was Jim Shooter, possibly in its history. I mean, this man came in there with a passion, and rightly so, and certainly the history points to that. This guy got into comics as a teenager. All right, his first job in comics was as a teenager, literally a kid. He was a kid. I think it was less than 15 years old. I think it was like 14 or something like that when he got his first job. And, he started writing comics at a young age. And he was respected for the quality of his work and his ideas. And that's precisely what got him the job at Marvel. And that's who we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Jim Shooter. And the reason why I wanted to talk about Jim is because I see him fairly regularly at comic book shows. And I know that many people in the audience are true hardcore comic book fans. And the least I can do is, have a conversation with you about, just a, fan conversation. I'm certainly a fan of Jim Shooter's. And if you guys are comic book fans, there's a good chance you guys are a fan of Jim's as well. So that's really what this is. Imagine us in a comic shop talking about Jim. And this is something that I'm very fortunate enough in that I tour with, Sigma Comics and with the Calico series and run into Jim all the time. And he's someone that I've had some just wonderfully delightful conversations with. And he's an inspiration. And every time that I speak to him, he's typically sitting behind, his table there. Almost always he's invited as a guest at these shows. And And these are shows all throughout the country, and he's there at these shows doing what he does best, which is talk about comics and participate in the culture of comics to this day, which is wonderful. And I'm so appreciative that he keeps on going. And frankly, I really wish that he was on some projects. I don't know if he is right now, but he possibly is, or maybe he's giving guidance to some projects out there. But when I do see him, it's at the shows, and it's making his contribution to the culture of comics, and he's signing comics and talking comics and doing all sorts of stuff, comic related stuff. And again, I do converse with him, and he's very very generous with his time, always giving advice, and I appreciate that. We've had some fun conversations. I told him that I was a former prize fighter, and he brought up the time that he brought up the time at Marvel when he was editor-in-chief, and he decided it was a good idea to have a boxing event at Marvel. All right, he got a bunch of guys together, and they got boxing gloves and headgears and mouthpieces and all these things, and they decided to have a combat day. Could you imagine this? And let me tell you, he was one of the guys in there, behind the gloves and the headgear, getting it done. And let me tell you, he's also a big boxing fan. He was the editor of I think he even wrote the story. I don't know if he wrote it. It's possibly he did write the story, but he was certainly the editor at the time. A story with I saw The Thing had some boxing gloves, and he was going into a boxing match with someone. And I don't know if he but yeah, he was he's a big fan of fighting. And the context of that was I was talking to my buddy Wes over at Thinking Critical, and the topic was about editors that had fundamental understanding of fighting and being involved in conflict, and how that differs from today, where you have some creators that have never even been in a fight. Imagine writing about something that you have absolutely no knowledge of. The essence of comic books and superheroes is conflict, okay? And what is the most basic interpretation of conflict? Fighting, right? So, well, yeah, you have some creators out there never taken a punch to the face. They've never even made a fist. They don't even know how to make a fist, right? So that's what the context was there when we talked about boxing and thinking about editors that very likely were boxing fans. And of course, I discussed this with Wes on his show on Thinking Critical. And of course, eventually I was able to speak to the man himself, Jim Shooter, and confirm with him directly that he is a big boxing fan. So I got the confirmation. You might hear some noise in the background. I hope you don't, but there's a kid yelling out there. Anyway, I hope you don't hear that. But the bottom line is, this was a great man, and he does so much for comics. He has done so much for comics, and he's an important fixture in the world of comics and the legacy of American comics in history. He's the editorial genius behind Secret Wars from Marvel. All these incredibly wonderful stories. I'm pretty sure he was the editor when with the Kraven story, Kraven's Last Hunt for Amazing Spider-Man. I may be mistaken, but I think he was. You guys can correct me in the audience there. Let me know if he wasn't, but there's so many great stories that I can't even think of right now. There's just so many. They're countless that Jim Shooter was behind. Certainly the one I remember was the Secret Wars. Just that whole concept, putting all of that together. He played a key role there, and so many others. But the truth is that Jim is someone who is very quick to give you advice when you need it. He certainly has given me good advice on the road when we see him at the show. I remember I saw him at one of these shows. I forget which one it was. They were giving him a hard time. I think it was the Heroes Con in North Carolina. They weren't even letting him in. The security didn't even know who he was, which is a shame that comics has gotten to the point where the legends aren't even recognized. How about that, huh? You know, you're working a show, and one of the guests and the legends of the show that you're focused on, the security team, doesn't even know who the person is. How about that? Yeah, they weren't letting him in. So I got in there between the group and of course said, hey, this guy's coming in with me. And of course, we were able to walk in and get into the show. But unbelievable stuff, folks. Unbelievable. That's the kind of story you get only on the road in comics. But anyway, that's what I wanted to share. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Jim and his contributions to comics. I just touched on, a couple of very minor ones, but he's someone who really was a key component of Marvel's great success, not only in comics, but opening Marvel up to other pieces of business like merchandising and toys. That was Jim Shooter. The 80s eras of Saturday morning cartoons. Jim was the creative, he's the editor at the time, and he thought it was a good idea to open, take comics beyond comics, right? And start getting into toys, into cartoons, and all these other things. And he certainly was very facilitating of this. And as a result, comics transcended comics, and it got into other parts of the popular culture and really grew as a result. So that's Jim Shooter for you, and again, remember, this is an industry that isn't necessarily the most open, and Jim Shooter certainly was. And he worked all of his creative staff very hard. There were no shortcuts to creating comics on Jim Shooter's watch. So in terms of quality, ethics, adherence to the brand, and opening comics into different uncharted waters. Hallelujah, amen. Jim Shooter, what a great job he did, and again, a true legend of the comic book industry. And I hope you learn more about Jim Shooter. There's lots of information out there about him. There's certainly books that he has that you can get. Support him at the bookshop. There's, any books that he's behind, or whether you order through your online ordering catalogs, you support him at the shows. Go say hello to Jim, and I'm sure he'll be happy you did say hello. All right, so that's it for today. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, because you know what, that helps. And don't forget to help us in our fight against animal abuse by supporting Here Comes Calico, the ultimate defender of animals. This is issue 7 I have in my hand, but issue 8 is on Kickstarter right now, and you can get the whole set, and it's very reasonable. And when you do that, you're helping us in our fight against animal abuse, and we appreciate you. Don't forget to keep on fighting for animals.